Yo, what's going on? So there's a sampling tactic that I've talked about a few times in past videos, but I've never actually had a video dedicated to this sort of sample flipping tactic. So I found a sample that I think will work really well with what I've talked about in the past, and I'll show you what that is. So today we're going to be working with this city pop record by Kayotaka Sugiyama. It's called Beyond. You can just tell by the cover, like, it's a city pop record. For whatever reason, it makes you feel super nostalgic, and this guy's just feeling it too right here. But I think there's a sample on here that we can chop up. I have it loaded up on the MPC already. But what I've talked about in the past is sometimes when I'm kind of getting lost in how to flip a sample, I'll really lower the semi and slow it down like crazy. And this does a few things. First off, it gives it sort of like this dreamy feel because it's so slowed down that it doesn't really sound like any sort of traditional instruments anymore. And the second thing it does is, depending on the bit rate of whatever you're using to chop samples, as you slow down the sample and stretch out that sample, the bit rate becomes less and less. So what that also means is the sample starts to sound more and more lo-fi because you're literally getting less bits, I guess, per second. So let's try that out with this sample. Here's how it sounds originally. This is original speed, how it's chopped up on here now, and it's just like this. So it's pretty quick. Right now, it could probably be chopped up into a sample with this current speed, but I think it would just sound so much better if we really slowed it down. So I'm going to go to Program Edit, and I'm going to put the semi down to, like, let's try -10. I'm going to lower it to even more, -12. And as you can hear now, it's super slow. So this also forces you to, when it's at regular speed or a little bit faster, a little bit slower, I feel like you're always kind of drawn to want to make loops, and there's nothing wrong with loops, but if you really want to get into like grabbing pads from everywhere, really in the true form chopping the sample and flipping it, then this sort of forces you to do that because you're not going to be able to just use the original BPM of this sample. If I did that, it would be super slow, and trying to add drums to that and make it sound like something like a hip-hop beat would be super difficult. So now that I have this super slowed down, I'll see if we can come up with a pattern. And like I said, we don't have to stick to any sort of BPM. We're just gonna look for sounds that we think are nice. And then you can try to stitch those together and format a pattern that is still rhythmic and still something that you can start adding on to. So let's see if we can come up with something like that. Okay, so I think I have a pattern figured out. I have the BPM set to 78. So let's lay down the pattern and then we can start adding on some other elements. Let's do it. So as you can hear, right now it doesn't really sound very musical or on beat, but that's because I really didn't listen to the samples BPM when I chopped it up. I was more so just trying to find something that I liked the sounds of and then stitching those together. But now once we add in some drums, it's really going to tie that in and make it sound a bit more cohesive. And when I'm recording the drums, and even with the drum samples that I'm looking for, because I have this sort of dreamy sounding sample, I'm going to try to keep those drums sounding that same way. So I have some really lo-fi sounding drums, which are just going to really add to that mood that we have in the song so far. So let's add those in. So listen to what I do with the hi-hat here. Right now I have the hi-hat set up on the 16 levels of velocity, but I'm going to try to play in some little ghost notes into the hi-hat, which I think will just add some really nice nuances to the beat. So let's do it. So you could hear some of those little additional notes that I added into some of those hi-hats, those offbeat notes, as well as I took out some of those eighth note hi-hats. So it just kind of keeps the beat changing a little bit and again gives it that sort of dreamy feel that we got with the sample. We could just keep continuing to add on to this sequence, but I'd rather go back to the sample and see if we can find another pattern. That way we'll have two sequences for this beat that we can keep kind of going back and forth to, just to make sure it's not getting too repetitive. Even if it's not as intricate as the first pattern we did, it will still just be something that we can continue to go back to say, here's a different section. So let's see what we can come up with. And then rather than re-record the drums, I'm just going to take the first two bars of our first sequence and copy that over to the second, and we'll just keep those drums consistent. So now that we have two sequences of the sample as well as some drums added to those, I think we can go in and add in a bass line for each of those two sequences. Once we do that, it's really going to make it sound more like a song, a full song, and really beef up those speakers a little bit. So I'm just going to use the MPC for this. I'll find a sample, I'll do a key group, find a bass sample, and then we can just add something using that. So let's do it. Okay, so I think this beat is really close to being finished, but I think the last thing that I want to do, just to really make sure that we're capturing the feel that we're trying to, which is that sort of dreamlike, really relaxing feel, is I want to just add in a few sounds. So I grabbed a couple sounds that I had saved on here, just in terms of like sound effects or little percussion hits. So this is what I found. And even though those sounds don't sound like much, I think it's really going to convey that feeling that we're trying to and just really put those finishing touches on this beat. So let's add those in. Okay, I think that's it for this beat. I think it turned out pretty well. And I just wanted to show if sometimes you're trying to flip a sample and you're having a hard time coming up with something, try just pitching it down like crazy and see if you can come up with something that you typically wouldn't. So if you like the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments what you want to see in a future video, and I appreciate you guys so much for hanging out. Thank you. Love you.